Protein overfeeding is more about fat loss than it is muscle gain. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. Again, one of these topics where when people hear about consuming extremely large amounts of protein or people forcing it down, they tend to associate this with bulking up. They're right, oh yeah, so people are eating all that protein to gain muscle because that's the idea. And the problem with that is that it sounds good in theory, and again, if people aren't familiar with the research, it actually seems really logical. So, when people think that, you can't fault them. Like, you can't say, oh, that's just silly, that's ridiculous, because, it seems almost common sense that would be the case, right? So you can't blame people for holding that viewpoint and thinking that's what's going on, because quite frankly, it actually sounds pretty reasonable, right? So here's the reality of it. A couple things to think about with that. Both the protein overfeeding studies as well as all the studies we have on muscle growth. And what you usually find, although this is being challenged again, apparently, what I'm seeing people is it's actually being challenged, and it might not even be true, it turns out. Lo and behold, we're dealing with complex things with the human body. But a lot of the research has largely indicated that almost all possible muscle growth should be caused by about 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, right? So if you weigh, 100 kg, 150 grams should cause that. And what a lot of the research was showing was that going beyond that doesn't really seem to cause any extra muscle growth from what we could tell, a pretty large number of studies. Again, pointing out that some recent studies have suggested it may be higher, that there's small gains to be had, but again, we're getting into a lot of debates. But generally speaking, most of the older studies and meta-analysis show that even for really advanced bodybuilders and competitive lifters, that it really did seem to be right around that 1.5 grams. Well, that's really not that much protein, because even someone my size, that's 150 or less grams a day to reach that threshold. I could do that in one meal. I routinely eat that much in a single meal. Right, that's just not that much protein, and that's not what we mean by protein overfeeding. Now, that being said, what we do find in the limited number of protein overfeeding studies, we didn't see extra muscle growth, really. We didn't. And meaning we're talking people consuming 3 or more grams per kilogram of body weight, right? So in that case, we're talking about, in the case of someone like me, you're talking about exceeding 300 grams of protein a day. Right now we're getting into protein overfeeding. And what the research has tended to show on that is you don't necessarily gain extra muscle from that. Like that's we're literally getting into double or more the numbers of where muscle growth doesn't seem to occur by adding more. So the question becomes, why would people do it? Well, it seems to cause fat loss, okay? And it seems to cause fat loss almost irrespective of trying to force feed additional calories. So the studies that looked at it, what they found is that when you take people who are at maintenance calories and who are on a high protein diet already, similar to that 1.5 gram that we talked about, and you try to force them to add 200 extra grams of protein a day while still maintaining their same meal plans, it was maintenance. So they do it early in the day. So some studies were done with that to where they made them consume 200 grams of protein in the form of whey protein shakes early in the day, then try to continue their normal meal plan and foods. And they all lost body fat and they all lost body weight, in spite of being in what should have been approximately an 800 calorie surplus. So that's what I mean by protein overfeeding. You feed excessive amounts of something specific beyond what your normal intake should be, right? On top of your normal day-to-day diet. So you're just adding it in and force feeding it. This has been done with carbohydrates and fats and all sorts of stuff in the past. But in the protein overfeeding studies for people who lifted weights, that's what happened. They all gained a little muscle, but they all lost weight and lost body fat, thus suggesting that somehow a calorie deficit was created by doing this, okay? And there's a few hypotheses into this. One of the prevailing ones would be, well, the nutrient partitioning and thermic effect is so high that it just forces you to lose some body fat, right? One of the other hypotheses that I've seen was at least one science-based expert kind of chimed in based upon the satiation you're getting from forcing that much protein, the people probably underate. Meaning they're supposed, like let's say their maintenance had been 3,000 calories and then they have macros and meal plan they were eating and they add this other protein and to, in theory, get to 3,800 that they get so sick of eating from the 200 grams of protein in one sitting, even in the form of shakes, that guess what? That they ended up eating less, like suggesting that maybe they only ate something like 2,800 calories or even at 3,000. But why does that matter? Well, because if you replace some of your carbs and fat with enormous amounts of protein like that, and you really are eating 300, 400 grams of protein while trying to hit these numbers that they are possibly eating, 800 or 1,000 less calories than what they really thought that they were eating. So they weren't even eating close to that extra, say 3,000 afterwards that should be their baseline, right? So you have that to consider in. Okay, the appetite suppression. And then we get over to, well, what about the thermic effect and nutrient partitioning? All that protein, the calories are not equal. In other words, if you were at maintenance at 3,000, but you change, say, 200 grams of your carbohydrates or 800 calories of your fat to protein, even though your calories were the same, your net energy turnover will not be the same. In other words, the calories out will change based upon the thermic effect and everything else. So then in that case, what happens in you, even though your calories in was identical, your calories out has changed enough that you have created a calorie deficit at that point. Okay, so then we've created a calorie deficit through that thermic effect of the protein, because it literally can be that high when we're talking hundreds of grams. People say, well, it's only a small amount of something like whatever, 20% or 30% of the calories. But when you're talking about what's 20% of 800 calories or 30% of 800 calories, well, that's significant, right? It's extremely significant. So what I'm suggesting here is there's a reason, when they do different fat loss studies, they always try to match protein intake, because protein itself can absolutely skew your calorie intake. It can skew it enormously through multiple pathways, both the much larger, more pronounced thermic effect and nutrient partitioning, as well as the ability to simply suppress your appetite so much that you can end up under eating if you're not careful when protein intakes go really, really high. So again, the whole point when we start talking about this really serious protein overfeeding, what are we really talking about? In this case, it almost invariably leads to fat loss. It invariably leads to fat loss. But the thing is, it tends to improve muscle growth any way you break it down as well.